Welcome back to the Andrew Reeder Show. Today we're in Lansing at the Anderson Building to speak with State Representative Scott VanSingel. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start with your personal views and standpoints. What do you have to say about the environment today?
Well, it really shouldn't be a partisan issue, and that's one of the things that I've taken a big interest in when I came to Lansing. I grew up on a farm, so you spend a lot of time out in nature, working in the environment every day, and also a hunter and fisherman. And so it's really intertwined with my lifestyle, clean, healthy water. I'm a trout fisherman, so cold, clean water is important for trout. And so it's been a passion of mine when I got to Lansing that let's not make this a partisan issue and have one party own the debate on environmental issues. And I've been one of the highest scoring Republicans on the environmental scorecards as far as voting record. And I've even taken some initiatives to promote pro-environmental legislation. One of them was passed last year. It's a Water Use Advisory Council that I helped reestablish through legislation. That's basically a group of experts that gets together and talks about water quality issues in the state of Michigan and water use issues. And another thing is I'm in on a bill package related to asbestos abatement. We don't really have the resources in the state of Michigan to manage asbestos as we tear down old buildings. And so this will provide a framework to track and provide resources to promote responsible asbestos removal. And I've also been an advocate for public lands. I enjoy grouse hunting and some of these things where you need big tracts of public lands to walk around on. Land shouldn't be something that's just accessible for the wealthy. That there is a public good to having access to public lands.
Okay, so what do you have to say about gun violence versus the Second Amendment?
I don't think there's anybody that sees what's going on with gun violence in this country and is not impacted. People on both sides of the debate about gun control versus the Second Amendment, we're all grieved by seeing these mass shootings and senseless violence. But we have different ideas about how you fix the problem. And rather than criminalizing law-abiding citizens through attacking the Second Amendment, I've been more of an advocate for let's make sure we enforce the existing laws that we have. Let's look at the mental illness crisis that we have in our country. Very few of these are sane people that are going in and committing acts of mass violence. We need to make sure that we have access to mental health for people that are on that borderline. It's hard to completely foresee who's going to do this and who just has mental health issues, but we need to be investing in mental health treatment in this country. And then when we do catch people that after the fact, unfortunately, we need to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law and not make excuses for them that they had a rough upbringing and turn them back out on the street. There needs to be severe consequences for people that commit these acts of violence, but I would prefer to work on the preventative side so that this doesn't happen.
Okay. And what do you have to say about the economy?
The economy is doing well right now, and it runs in cycles. We're probably towards the tail end of one of the strongest economic expansions our country's ever seen. But some of the things that drive that are certainty. Businesses don't part with capital unless there's certainty that there's a return on investment. So we need to have certainty in our regulations and our tax codes to make sure that business owners and investors want to invest and part with capital, and that America is an attractive place. In Michigan also, we've been slowly trying to roll back punitive regulations and tax codes and create a fairer, flatter tax system, more certainty. It's not perfect, but we're a lot better than where we were 10 years ago in Michigan, and we've seen the results of that as far as economic growth that's happened here.
Okay. And do you say we have any problems with our education?
Yeah, not just in Michigan, but nationwide. Some of what's driving this is a breakdown in the family. When you're, the homeless crisis that we have with kids, where you're moving, maybe not exactly homeless, but you don't have a permanent residence, and you see kids moving from house to house or not sleeping in the same bed every night, or going to school hungry because of just family issues that are going on. That really impacts education, but that's not unique to Michigan. This is going on nationwide. Michigan has some unique challenges as far as we've seen just a plummet in test scores compared to other parts of the country. And we're still trying to figure out some of the reasons why, but some of that is we just keep opening new school systems, and then you're spreading those resources thinner and thinner. We also have had trouble investing what we need in the classroom because of the burden of the pension system that's blown up. Almost $1 in $3 is that we spend on education goes into the pension system, and it's not making it to the classroom. We need to keep those obligations, but that does create challenges when you look at the public school system. So there's not one simple answer that, well, if we just tested more or if we added this one class, then we'd be on par with the rest of the country and the world. There's multiple things that we need to do to reform education in Michigan.
Okay. And what about agriculture?
Agriculture is one of the biggest industries in my district, and it's had some challenges recently, and a lot of that is coming from trade deals. I applaud the president for tackling some of these trade issues. I believe in free trade, but I also believe in fair trade.
Yeah.
He's been trying to clean up some of these unfair trade practices, but unfortunately agriculture has been the one industry that's been the loser in this. The countries are responding with retaliatory tariffs, and a lot of that's been on agriculture products. And so that's hurting an industry where there's already quite a bit of risk when you're dealing with markets and the weather, and then to all of a sudden see these markets dry up because of tariffs. It's really hurt, especially the specialty crops in my district. And a lot of that's more of a federal issue than it is the state, but it is impacting us locally.
Okay. And what do you say about the rights of state government? What kind of rights should they have?
I tend to be a states' rights advocate, and some of that comes from the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that says whatever powers are not given to the federal government belong to the state government. I take that quite literally, that there's not a lot of things the federal government was meant to do. I believe a strong military is one of their number one responsibilities. Most of those other powers belong to the states, and we've slowly been losing those powers to the federal government over the years. But yeah, I believe education and infrastructure, roads, tax policy, all those things belong at the state level. And typically the closer the government is to the people, the better the decisions they make, because you tend to have to look those people in the eye and you bump into them in the community versus the more distant people that work in Washington. It's just harder to come in contact with a bigger constituency that you have.
Okay. And would you say we have a problem with foreign laws leaking into the American courts?
It hasn't happened yet, but we're so much in the United States, but we're seeing that in Europe, and particularly with the Sharia law, that as you have groups of, and I'm not anti-immigrant by any means, but as you have groups of people come in and refuse to assimilate, there have been cases in Europe where judges start citing foreign law or religious law as legal precedent rather than the actual laws that are on that country's books. And I don't believe that should ever happen in this country. We have good laws, both at the state and federal level. Those are the laws that should be cited in our court system, never foreign law, never religious laws.
So is this kind of just something you want to nip in the bud before it happens?
Yeah, preemptive. There was legislation introduced last term, which I co-sponsored to deal with this, but it never ended up moving, and it may come up again this term.
Okay. All right, and then would you say we're losing our religious liberty?
There certainly are attacks. I still believe we're probably one of the freest countries in the world when it comes to religious liberty. That was one of the reasons that we were founded, or why people originally came here. Some of it was economic opportunity, but one of the primary drivers was religious liberty, and that's still extremely important to me. There's a reason it's in the First Amendment, not the 9th or 10th Amendment or the 20th Amendment. It was one of the forefront items on our founders' minds. And I believe it's one of the most important things we need to protect. And we've seen there's presidential candidates that are talking about this time around, if churches don't agree with what we believe, then we need to remove their tax exempt status. I would look at that as an attack on religious liberty. The government has no business telling churches or synagogues or whatever religion you belong to what they're allowed to believe, and threaten them with economic sanctions. So I do see attacks coming, but it's nothing like what other countries deal with. But again, we need to be preemptive and make sure that this never does happen in our country.
All right. Okay, so that's about it for that. Let's talk about things you've done as a representative to the 100th district. You did the pension reform.
Yeah, I was not personally the bill sponsor when it came to that, but I played a role in reforming the teacher retirement system here in Michigan. If you go back about 2.5 years ago, shortly after I took office, there was a bill introduced to completely close the teacher retirement system to new applicants. I'm not a big fan of public pensions. They're almost always mismanaged, and then the taxpayers are on the hook. But we also have a moral obligation to people we made promises to. And what this bill did is when you close a system, it destabilizes the investments. If you have cash flows that are exceeding cash inflows, you have to de-risk your investments, and a lot of the return or the payouts in a pension system are based on investment returns. So the lower the risk, the lower the return, the more money you have to put into the system. And so it was billions and billions of dollars that it would have taken to stabilize the system had we gone this route. I had the opportunity to sit down with Governor Snyder and present some ideas that I had on what the actual fix should be. And that bill was redrafted and then signed into law that incorporated most of those ideas that I had. And essentially what we did was we incented employees to not take the pension by giving them a really good 401k option or a defined contribution plan, but still left the plan open to those people that absolutely wanted a pension. I went into this job for the security of a secure retirement, and there's a certain proportion. If you still have a few of those people going in, you don't destabilize the plan, and it's worked out just about perfectly so far. The plan's over 100% funded, and we have just about the right number of people that are choosing the pension plan to where we don't have the destabilization problems. So I thought that was one of the biggest public policy items that I'd worked on so far since I started, and that was only about 5 or 6 months into the job. And it was quite an experience working on something when you're literally dealing with tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And if you get it wrong, you're dealing with tens of billions of dollars going the other direction. So so far it's worked out quite well.
Okay. And then you also did something about occupational licensing reform?
Yeah, so I introduced a 3-bill package last year that dealt with, there's what's called a good moral character clause when you apply to the state for a licensing, whether to be an electrician or a healthcare worker. And they're there for a good reason. We want trustworthy people going into these professions. The problem is you would have to go through all of the licensing requirements, pay a fee, take the training, get the hours in that you needed, and then you would find out on the back end, oh, by the way, we didn't think you passed this good moral character clause. And so some people that were on the fence would say, oh, I don't know if it's worth it. I may not pass this. I'm not going to invest the time and money to do this. And they never took the chance at it. So what we did is we moved that decision point up to the beginning, where you could find out right at the beginning of this process, yes or no, you have what it takes to move forward in the process.
Oh,
and
okay.
I believe they passed unanimously the 3-bill package and were signed into law last year. And this will hopefully bring thousands of new people into the workforce that now will at least take a chance into getting into these professions. In the things that could have excluded somebody, say a drunk driving conviction from years ago, it's sort of a judgment call at Lara whether you pass this test or not. It's not a very precise science, I should say, to what would disqualify or qualify somebody. So it was one of my prouder accomplishments in my first term, and it was a bipartisan package we ended up putting together.
Okay. And then school safety reform?
Yeah, so just minutes ago, actually, before we started this interview, one of my bills just passed out of regulatory reform, which maybe you've seen possibly in your own school. There's these little barricade devices that you can slide into the floor that lock a door from the inside. So if you're in an active shooter event, for example, they can't get in. They can kick and pound on that door as much as they want, but there's a steel boot at the bottom of that door that prevents them from entering. Those are technically illegal because of fire codes. And so we worked with Lara and the fire marshal to come up with a bill that says under these circumstances, these cannot be outlawed. And a lot of these school systems were hesitant to put these into use because it's a major investment. And if you're investing in something like that and you find out it's illegal, they just may not do it. And there's people's lives at stake here. So common sense prevailed here, and this, just minutes ago passed out unanimously out of reg reform, and it'll continue moving through the legislative process. Last term, I also worked with Representative LaFave on a sentencing reform for when people make threats to a school or really any sort of terroristic threat of violence. There really were only two options: a 20-year felony or a misdemeanor. And quite often, neither of those fit perfectly. And so these people weren't prosecuted or weren't prosecuted properly. We passed legislation that sort of created a middle ground there, that if you make an active attempt, or you don't have to carry through the threat, but you start the process of carrying out an attack. It gave prosecutors a middle ground of a 10-year felony sentence that was maybe a little bit more realistic. They still have those other two options, but just gave prosecutors more options, and that was widely popular last year as well.
Okay. All right, and then lastly, we have the Water Use Advisory Council.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in our first question. That was something that was towards the end of last session I introduced, and we had unanimous support all the way through the House and Senate that created a group of experts that would advise the state on water use. Luckily, we have a lot of water in Michigan, but other states aren't so lucky. As time goes on and as climate change makes some areas drier and some areas wetter, this could be a big issue in Michigan. People are going to be looking at our water and putting a price on it and saying, hey, we want some of that. I think it's important to have experts in charge of advising the legislature on good water policy going forward.
So it seems like you like to look into the future.
Yeah, and that's difficult sometimes because people are here for such a short amount of time. We're limited to 6 years in the House, and the temptation is to look at the here and now and get through this one budget cycle or this 1 year or just past this one election. But I really want to leave a legacy that I'm leaving the state better for my daughter and grandkids or whoever.
Okay. And then, so currently you're working on allowing limited liability companies to represent themselves in court.
Yeah, this was one of the first bills I introduced last term, and it ended up dying in lame duck. We got it through the House, and so I reintroduced it this year, and it's made it through the House, and it's in a Senate committee right now. This essentially would allow people that own a property under an LLC to represent themselves in court for usually an eviction case. Right now, as soon as you put that property into an LLC, which you probably should do to protect yourself, you are not allowed to represent yourself in court. You need to hire an attorney, which could be $1,000+ to do a simple eviction. This would allow people where it's a single owner, you may own 1 or 2 houses, to represent yourself in court. You're allowed to represent yourself in court if you're accused of murder, but not a landlord-tenant case. And so it's just one of those common sense cases. It's unfortunately a pretty partisan issue. I view it as a protectionist issue. The Bar Association's not real big on this. They would prefer to have attorneys acting in these cases, but I think it's good policy, and it's just a basic legal right we have as Americans, in my opinion.
Okay. And then what's this about restoring school aid funds?
Yeah, so in lame duck, probably the worst bill that was passed the entire last session. On the last day of lame duck, we were presented with a bill that changed the income tax formula that diverted $170 million roughly out of the school aid fund into other areas, environmental cleanup and roads. It should have never been done. I was pulled into the speaker's office that night, and he said, "We need one more vote. Can you get on board?" I said, "Absolutely not. This is a terrible bill." And the deal was the governor was not going to sign any more of our bills that had been piling up if we didn't pass this. And so I agreed to vote for the bill. It passed, and I said, "I will do this under one circumstance. You let me come back in January and fix this, because this is wrong. We shouldn't be using school aid dollars for other purposes. We need to raise the funds if these are really priorities of ours." The Speaker kept his word, and I introduced the bill back in January, and that's actually up in an Appropriations Committee tomorrow for a vote that will essentially undo this and create a permanent funding source for the roads and environmental cleanup, but restore the dollars to the school aid fund. That turns out to be $172 million in this fiscal year that will go back into the school aid fund. So substantial amount of money, and that was built into the budget for this year as well.
Okay. So do you have any future goals for Michigan?
Really just trying to stay on the same path we have for the past several years, is continue to advocate for a fair and certain tax code. None of these carve-outs to specific groups that we like, and trying to balance the budget with short-term gimmicks, just certainty going forward, regulatory certainty. And then I want to stay on the path to paying down our pension debt and other debts. We do have to have a balanced budget in Michigan, but there are ways around that by just not making your pension payments. And it's been a temptation in the past to not make those payments or really acknowledge what the true problem is. So I want to stay on that path of just continuing to pay down our debt, live within our means. And Governor Snyder had said in 2038 that would be the ideal year to run for governor, because we'll be debt free and there'll be a lot of money to work with. I want to hit that goal and not keep pushing the can down the road and having our kids try to fix these problems.
Okay. And so you've been state representative of the 100th district for 2 terms?
Yep.
All right, this is your 3rd year.
Yes.
And do you plan to run for your 3rd term?
Yeah, I am allowed to run up to 3 terms, and if the people will have me back, I'd like to run one more time and serve the full 6 years that I'm allowed. The election will determine that, I guess.
Yeah. All right. And do you have any other personal goals or opportunities you wish to share?
I really don't know what comes next.
Yeah.
I didn't know 6-7 years ago that I would be here, and it's been a dream come true, and we'll just see where I'm led next. And not real worried at this point, but I can tell you for certain 3 years from now I won't be a state rep.
Yeah. All right. And do you have anything else you wish to share?
No, I appreciate your time, and it's nice to meet young people that are interested in what we're doing here in Lansing.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for watching.